Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, Robert Meyer Burnett. I invite you to watch and listen to the Designing Hollywood podcast, brought to you by Martika Ibarra and the great, legendary Hollywood costume designer, Marilyn Vance. I am afforded the wonderful opportunity of co-hosting the show. If you are interested in the magic of Hollywood, the design of Hollywood, the clothes of Hollywood, watch the Designing Hollywood podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts from, or find the video version on YouTube. That's right, the Designing Hollywood podcast. Why would you ever want to miss it, especially if you love the movies?
Tango Shalom is now available on all VOD
major platforms. I think we messed that up.
Video on demand, or as they say in the trade, VOD.
VOD. Tango Shalom is now available on all VOD platforms,
which means
video on demand.
Look how you know. You must be a high school graduate.
I'm a college graduate.
Really?
Yes.
I got an honorary degree from Hofstra. Did you get an honorary degree?
No, I got a degree.
Oh, well, I got honorary. You know, I'm in the Jewish Museum.
What for?
What do you mean? As a famous Jew in the Bronx. I'm in the famous...
I'm in the Prospect Park in the Stones.
How big is the stone?
Robservations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and as yet undefined still, your existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and once again, I am, say it with me now, Robcasting. I am Robcasting at you, you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. Yes, it is Robservations, episode number 771, the show about something. So, you know, there are very few filmmakers left who my de facto position is I will watch anything that they make. And it seems strange to me that this has to be said, but I'm going to say it right out. I'll just say it right away. One of the greatest filmmakers, not just of our time, but of all time, the GOAT perhaps, is Mr. Steven Spielberg. I have been watching Steven Spielberg movies. The first Steven Spielberg movie I saw in the theater was Jaws. First run in 1975. I was 8. And it took me a while. It wasn't one of those opening weekend things because I had to beg, I had to plead to see it. And, it was back in that, like every kid in the world wanted to see Jaws. And, of course, no one would let me see it at the time. But eventually, I was able to go. I think I went with Jeff Swafford on his birthday. And we all went to the Coliseum Theater in downtown Seattle, which no longer exists. But it was the same place I saw movies like Roller Coaster and Sense Around. And I saw Flash Gordon there and all kinds of different things. I called it a soda stick theater. A soda stick theater is a theater where all the floors are sticky with spilled soda. And it was a grand theater once, but even when I was a kid, it was a little bit ramshackle. But still, it was still a grand movie palace. It was right across the street from the town, right down the street from the Music Box. It was right in Seattle's Central Theater District. And I saw Jaws there, and it forever changed my life. Of course, later on, I stood in line in Seattle on 6th Avenue. There was the great UA 150 Theater, where, of course, Star Wars opened. Empire Strikes Back played longer there first run than I think anywhere else, any theater in the world. And across the street was the King Cinema, where you might wonder, yes, that's where I saw it, To Live and Die in L.A., but also Close Encounters of the Third Kind opened there. And even though it opened about 6 months after Star Wars Everyone was still lined up on either side of the street. And on one side was the Star Wars line, and on the other side was the Close Encounters line. And let me tell you, one of my favorite things, still to this day, is listening to John Williams' score at the beginning of Close Encounters with that, like, choral music, and then it cuts into the ba-da! One of the great ba-da-s of all time. Maybe the only ba-da! You know, if you've seen Close Encounters and you know the movie as well as I do, you know what I'm talking about. And then, boom, you're right into the Sonora Desert. The missing Flight 19 shows up. And I'll tell you, there was no way that as a child of the 70s and 80s, you could not admit to yourself that Steven Spielberg made the greatest movies you'd ever seen. I mean, sure, there were others, like there were one-offs, but consistently. I mean, you went from Jaws to Close Encounters. Now, as a kid, I respected 1941. I understood it was like there was that goofy, overblown comedic side to American filmmakers. John Landis made the Blues Brothers. There was 1941, but then there was Raiders. And then the next year it was E.T. And then 2 years after that, it was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And then after that, he made Color Purple. He made Empire of the Sun. He produced Poltergeist. He produced Gremlins. Yeah, he produced Goonies, but okay, I'd give him a pass. But Steven Spielberg is one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. And people would say, well, you know, Rob, his classic period is long behind him. But I don't think that's necessarily true. I think his filmmaking powers, I mean, if you watch a movie like Catch Me If You Can, which is a beautifully made movie. If you watch Minority Report, of course, there's Saving Private Ryan, there's Jurassic Park, there's Schindler's List. You know, I don't know why, but I had an aversion to watching Lincoln. And I had bought the Blu-ray, and it was one of those Blu-rays I kept moving down the pile. I didn't see it theatrically, which now will probably regret it my whole life. But, you know, Lincoln, some of his historical epics, Amistad, Lincoln, you know, I watched Lincoln. I loved it so much I watched it 4 times in a week. And whenever Spielberg makes a movie, even if he makes things that I'm not necessarily particularly fond of, like the BFG, which is not a bad movie, but the only Spielberg movie I have actively despised in my whole life, and we're talking Always, I liked Always a lot, sue me. I did not like Hook. And nor will you ever convince me to like Hook. It was cloying. As I said, I hope Hook and the Goonies are playing on a double bill somewhere for the rest of time, and I never go to where that place is. But I'm not a fan of Hook. But other than that, the man is a master craftsman. He just knows where to move a camera. I've wanted to see him make a musical my whole life. 1941, you know, the Zoot Suit Riot sequence. There's incredible stuff going on in that sequence. Of course, the whole Anything Goes opening from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. You're like, when is this guy going to make a full-blown musical? Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gentle beings, however you identify across these known galaxies, 28 known galaxies, he did. He remade one of my favorite films, believe it or not, Robert Wise, Jerome Robbins' West Side Story. And, of course, that was music by Leonard Bernstein and lyrics by a very young, mid-20s Stephen Sondheim. And, I mean, I loved West Side Story. I've seen West Side Story, the original. I'm talking about the original now, in 70 millimeter on numerous occasions. I think the first time was at the Seattle International Film Festival, and they used to have midnight. They would have a 70 millimeter festival at the Cinerama in Seattle, and you'd stay up all night. I mean, I saw Ben-Hur there. I saw Lawrence of Arabia there in 70 millimeter. I think that's the first time. I've seen West Side Story in 70 about 4 times in the theater, and I've seen it countless times on home video, and I love it. I love the original West Side Story. Yes, it's certainly a product of its time. So to me, the idea that Steven Spielberg was remaking West Side Story was something I was deliriously excited about. And last night, I went to the beautiful Chinese Theater on Hollywood Boulevard at their beautiful laser projection IMAX-equipped facility to see it with my friend David Hargrove. And Dave and I talk about films. We'll get on the phone, and our sessions on the phone, we gab like little teenage girls. We'll talk for hours and hours and hours about the industry and about movies. We went and saw West Side Story, and I have to say, after watching it, now I saw it, of course, over the weekend. It only opened to $10 million. It cost $100 million, and it is considered by all metrics so far, let's call it an extreme disappointment. When I saw the film last night, I have to say, first of all, again, everything I ever wanted to see from Steven Spielberg in terms of making a musical. The film is it is so beautifully made, and it is the shot choices and the direction are just off the charts good. I mean, it was a marvel to watch. And I really loved the experience of watching it, and I would highly recommend it. That said, I did not love the movie as much as I wanted to love it. But I'm going to get back to that because I want to sort of cover a number of different things. The first thing I want to do is I want to read, I read Richard Rushfield's articles. And I talked to Dave about Richard Rushfield. He has his newsletter called The Ankler, and I would say if anybody is interested in covering the industry, or at least one man's look at the industry, I would highly recommend subscribing to Richard Rushfield's The Ankler, which I love the name. He ankled this thing. I guess to be ankled, I don't know why. It's an industry term. He ankled the project, meaning you leave the project or whatever, the ankler. So he's a cantankerous guy, and Dave Hargrove is not a big fan of Richard Rushfield, whereas I am. But I want to start by sharing his article that he sent out from yesterday. His piece. He wrote a piece called "West Side's Belly Flop: The Dam is Breaking." Now, I've read articles from him talking about the demise of the theatrical distribution exhibition business as we know it. And so this article is called "West Side's Belly Flop: The Dam is Breaking. A Spielberg spectacle can't hold back the trend lines." This is Richard Rushfield. So another week in which the rules still pretty much stand. Nothing opens other than giant tentpoles, and giant tentpoles can't open big enough to pay for themselves. As for West Side Story, can you believe people didn't want to see West Side Story? The most famous musical in the world for baby boomers. It's pre-sold. So, have you met Americans lately, or the entertainment consumers of the world? It may shock you to learn that they aren't versed in the history of mid-century American musical theater. The mass culture as it stands can barely remember who Katy Perry was, and won't take kindly to anyone pointing out to them that entertainment existed in a time before that. As for whether the film will have legs, do any of you recall how West Side Story ends? Spoiler alert, Tony doesn't reveal he's really Iron Man. Can any of you recall the last time a 4-quadrant movie sent the audiences out into the world on such a dour note, particularly in a dour time? I attended in the company of 2 children. The audience that story needs if you're going to talk about the Greatest Showman word-of-mouth path. The youth in my company walked out stunned that a movie had done that to them at the end, almost betrayed that such a loyal friend could whack them in the face with a 2x4. Yes, I'm aware it's from Shakespeare. For those of you who don't know, West Side Story is a riff on Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Yes, I'm aware it's from Shakespeare, and I'm also not aware of today's entertainment consumers granting The Bard a license too harsh on their mellow. At least, not enough of them to fund a 9-figure budget. I'm also aware this is Philistinism, but again, unless you've invented a time machine that will allow the chains to transport an audience from 1973, I personally love the movie. This is Richard Rushfield talking. I was dazzled, all my thumbs way up. I'd be happy to see it get whatever awards there are to be got. If it fails at the box office, it's a noble failure that speaks well of all involved. And I'm open to, but not optimistic about, the possibility that it somehow legs it, that a massive Oscar sweep carries it into profitability. Things happen. But looking beyond that, the stack of evidence that box office today is a pale shadow of box office of yore is becoming an elephant in the room, as everyone tries to ignore it and say, Well, if only they'd released it 2 weeks later. Well, if only they had Timothée Chalamet. Well, if only they'd set it in Tampa. But looking at the fate of the industry as the sword of Damocles dangles, how many examples do we need of things that don't work anymore on this jalopy of a theatrical business before we start to wonder if it's safe out on the road? At least not without some wholesale modifications, like a new engine and a new body for starters. That's the thing here in my recent forecasts of the end of the film industry. I don't necessarily mean it will cease to exist entirely, just that the industry as we know it is doomed. The returns are in now, and we can try and dance our way around them as much as we want. But this isn't just exit polls and the citizens of Dixville Notch. We've got months of data now, on top of 10 years of numbers before that. Hear ye, hear ye! The movie business will be changing into something else. The music industry didn't die after the digital dawn, but today's business bears little resemblance to the recording industry of 2001. The news business still exists and even thrives in some quarters, but very few of the jobs of 2010 are still around. There's still bookstores out there and taxicab companies. They didn't die. Just everything about the way they function did. Of course, if an industry isn't willing or able to change the way it functions, dying remains an option. But there's no saying that's where we're headed yet. Quite yet. Various parties have written story needed real stars, not this Ansel character. So who exactly are the major proven box office stars ready to play singing teenagers with a bigger draw than Ansel Elgort? There is a chicken and the egg problem here, but the fact that we've stopped minting new mega movie stars can be expected to have some impact here and there. As for the Oscar angle, a very wise Ankler friend points out, quote, usually it's the low-budget indie film with a small audience that the critics love, which gets a lot of noms. This year, it's a big-budget Hollywood film which critics love, but no one wants to see that'll get the most nominations. And coming up soon, Spider-Man, which, if it doesn't succeed, then it's time to get down to the bomb cellar. But I ask impertinently, will this be the one where succeed means something close to the commonly understood definition of success for a movie release? At least the definition circa 3 months ago? That is, will a successful opening mean one that actually puts the film on track to be financially profitable? Or will it mean it did well for the COVID-era standards, beat expectations, etc., etc.? How many more gentlemen's C's have you got left in that big box office reporters? And on top of the things that do not happen in the healthy industry, this morning, well, I won't go on to that. Anyway, I really like what he was saying here, as he has been. I mean, do I think that the movie business is going to end as we know it? I think it's definitely changing, and it's changing before our eyes, and if you choose to accept it or not, it's still going to change. And unfortunately, I think there's a lot of reasons for West Side Story's failure at the box office, but I think the biggest one is that you can talk about older audiences that the movie was directed towards just didn't show up because of COVID. I think that's possibly part of the reason, but I do think that there's others, and I think the biggest one is that your modern audiences don't know or care about West Side Story. We live in a post-Hamilton, post-Baz Luhrmann, Moulin Rouge, Romeo and Juliet. Now we've got Tick, Tick, Boom. We've got In the Heights. We've got a lot of modern musicals that have become, even La La Land, what musicals now are to modern audiences. West Side Story is very much a throwback to an era that has little resemblance to where we're at now. Now, there's an article in Variety I wanted to cover. Rebecca Rubin wrote this, and it was in the Hollywood Reporter yesterday. Why Steven Spielberg's West Side Story hit the wrong box office notes. Steven Spielberg managed to get critics on board for his ambitious West Side Story remake, but the movie-going masses, not so much. Over the weekend, Disney and 20th Century Studios' reimagining of West Side Story collected just $10.5 million in its domestic debut, a dismal result for a movie of its scale and scope. The lavish musical, one of the best-reviewed movies of the year, carries a $100 million budget and faces an uphill battle to profitability. Given its price tag, industry insiders estimate West Side Story needs to generate at least $300 million globally to break even in its theatrical run. The film is playing... Now think about that. West Side Story, it costs $100 million. It goes along with my box office rule of a movie... Well, conventional wisdom has to make 3 times its budget just to break even. So West Side Story has to make $300 million to break even. And it opened with $10.5 million at the domestic box office. That's a disaster. It's a huge disaster. Anyway, the film is playing exclusively on the big screen and doesn't have a hybrid streaming component, which could help ticket sales in the long run, but it has an awful lot of ground to make up. West Side Story could sustain momentum through the holidays and emerge in the black, analysts say, but the tepid initial grosses underscore Hollywood's concerns, which have become more pronounced during the pandemic about the viability of theatrical movies that don't involve superheroes or CGI action sequences. After all, West Side Story is based on one of the biggest musicals in theater history and hails from Hollywood's most recognizable director. If a well-executed movie that exudes commercial appeal can't get audiences to go to theaters, can anything? Since musicals have been struggling at the box office in COVID times, Disney appears to have been bracing for West Side Story to start slow. Prior to its release, the studio had negotiated with theater operators to keep West Side Story on screens through the new year. It's a rare deal, one that could only be wielded by the studio that often produces the highest-grossing movies. Normally, multiplex owners would drop a film that isn't selling tickets to make room for the litany of new releases around Christmas time, often the industry's busiest time of year. So even though West Side Story fell short of expectations, Disney doesn't have to worry about movie theaters taking the movie off screens to devote more auditoriums to Spider-Man No Way Home, The Matrix Resurrections, or Sing 2, which, by the way, I saw a trailer for last night, which I had not watched before, and looked pretty good during the crowded holiday season. The biggest obstacle facing West Side Story is, and will continue to be, convincing older audiences to go to theaters. Along with families, it's the main demographic that hasn't returned in full force since the pandemic, particularly at a time when a new COVID variant has emerged, though it's too soon to say how it will affect moviegoing. Among these select people who bought tickets on opening weekend, 57% were female, and 26%, the largest percentage, were over the age of 55. The second largest percentage of moviegoers, 21%, were between 25 and 34. Historically, adult audiences don't make much of an effort to see a film on its opening weekend. During the pandemic, people over the age of, say, 40 aren't making an effort at all. Getting those crowds back to the big screen will be a key in the movie theater ecosystem's revival. Given stellar reviews and positive audience reactions, it's feasible that word of mouth will spread and convince potential skeptics about the need for another West Side Story. Many Oscar pundits believe it's a formidable awards contender which could boost its profile and sustain its life in theaters. They're chasing an audience that doesn't rush out on opening weekend, says Paul DeGarabedian, a senior media analyst with ComScore. You have to look at long-term playability. That will really tell the story of the box office for West Side Story. For that reason, box office analysts aren't ready to label West Side Story as a bomb. Prior to the pandemic, mid-December would be a prime time to premiere a song and dance spectacle. Other than Cats, which failed spectacularly, many popular movie musicals, Les Miserables, La La Land, The Greatest Showman, Mary Poppins Returns, to name a few, landed in fall and winter months and had longer than usual runs on the big screen. I didn't realize that Mary Poppins Returns made $350 million globally. La La Land, $448 million. Les Miserables, $442 million. Those are huge numbers that West Side Story is never going to reach, even if it has the same kind of second life that The Greatest Showman did. If it got universally bad reviews, it would be game over, DeGarabedian says, but I wouldn't write off West Side Story given the quality and time of year. I think it could do well. Case in point, 2017's The Greatest Showman was dismissed as a flop after debuting to $8.8 million. Yet audiences got hooked on the soundtrack, leading This Is Me to become a zeitgeist-tapping anthem, and people, mostly younger females, returned to cinemas again and again for sing-along screenings. The film became a sleeper hit as domestic ticket sales chugged along to $171 million and global receipts totaling $436 million. In the past, we've seen musicals connect with critics and audiences and go on a run, says David A. Gross, who runs the movie consulting firm Franchise Entertainment Research. In the case of The Greatest Showman, the charismatic duel of Hugh Jackman as circus ringmaster P.T. Barnum and Zac Efron as his lackey helped bolster the film's profile. However, star power didn't stand a chance of salvaging Cats, Universal's A-list adaptation of Andrew Lloyd Webber's long-running musical, which had Taylor Swift, Idris Elba, Jennifer Hudson, and Judi Dench. A mostly unknown cast became an obstacle for In the Heights, which scored excellent reviews and earned only $11.5 million in its debut, which, by the way, is more than West Side Story, while playing simultaneously on HBO Max. Similarly, West Side Story features mostly newcomers, except for Rita Moreno, who won an Oscar for the 1961 film and returns as a new character named Valentina, and Ansel Elgort, best known for Baby Driver and The Fault in Our Stars. Moreno was prominent on the promotional trail alongside her magnetic co-stars Rachel Zegler and Ariana DeBois. But Elgort, who plays Tony to Zegler's Maria, charted a more careful path on his press tour in the wake of a sexual assault allegation levied against him in 2020. The actor denies the claim, but he avoided in-depth interviews or cover stories where he would most likely be asked about the allegation. Spielberg, who by far is the film's biggest star, also limited his press presence almost exclusively to junket interviews. It's a curious choice given Spielberg's track record in churning out commercial winners and prestigious award players. His voice could have increased awareness for the movies. It's possible that Spielberg sat back to let his actors, in a deviation from the 61 version, Puerto Rican characters are all portrayed by Latinos, speak to the film's contemporary resonance. The initial 1957 Broadway production and subsequent movie later drew criticism because four white men, Jerome Robbins, Leonard Bernstein, Stephen Sondheim, and Arthur Lawrence, conceived the show about warring street gangs of different ethnic backgrounds. In order to give the Puerto Rican sharks, who are taunted by the white jets, a more nuanced portrayal on screen, screenwriter Tony Kushner enlisted Moreno as an executive producer as one of the painstaking steps to update the script and smooth out any cultural sensitivities that plagued earlier versions of West Side Story. In Variety's review, chief critic Owen Gleiberman says he felt Spielberg and Kushner had succeeded in making necessary changes while staying true to the charm of the original ill-fated love story. Gleiberman wrote, "The whole film feels as contemporary as it needs to be since topicality is baked into its tribal dance of racial animosity." However, some box office pundits believe that today's audiences do not share the same affinity toward the Romeo and Juliet-esque tale. This is a story about an interracial romance. Once upon a time, that was rare and remarkable. Not anymore, says Gross. For moviegoers, context may have caught up with the film, however well made it is. Another significant issue with the big screen adaptations of musicals is they're not cheap to stage. That makes it difficult for them to turn an easy profit. It's a change that Hollywood will continue to grapple with in the coming years. The Little Mermaid, Wicked, The Color Purple are among the live-action movies in the works. And then there's Richard Linklater's grandiose Merrily We Roll Along adaptation, which features Beanie Feldstein and Ben Platt and will be filmed over the course of 20 years. In the next 2 decades, maybe musicals will be back in vogue, and COVID will have danced its way out of our lives. If not, there won't be a whole lot to sing about. Now, one of the things that I found interesting about this film is a lot of people are saying, well, Rob, this is a woke version of West Side Story. Maybe that's why people are tired of it. To that, I would say, I think the basing this on Romeo and Juliet, where you have the Montagues and the Capulets, or in this case, basically the Polish community and the Puerto Rican community, you literally have two communities of people that really don't like each other very much, and you have two people that fall in love with each community trying to build a bridge to common ground. I would say the very definition of finding tolerance and enjoying people, or finding the things that make us similar. And of course, in the story of Romeo and Juliet, it takes the death of 2 people, or 3 people really, to bring us there. That's the very different definition of what social justice is trying to achieve. But what I found really interesting in this, and I want to read another article about a character in the film, a secondary character to be sure, but a character that I thought was, within the context of the movie, kind of interesting. And I really enjoyed, in terms of Spielberg's update, I thought this was pretty interesting. Now, this article I found came from Pink News, which is an LGBTQ website. Now, Susan Oakes played the character of Anybody's in the 61 version. She's on the left. And Iris Minas played Anybody's in this version. Now, Iris identifies as a non-binary lesbian, and her preferred pronouns, or Z and her, HIR, are her preferred pronouns, or Z. So, but Iris is playing Anybody's, and Z calls the character him. And I wanted to read this story, so it's a little confusing. But for many years, queer audiences have flocked to West Side Story and seen themselves represented in the gender non-conforming character Anybody's. In the original 1961 film, the character is depicted as a tomboy who desperately wants to be accepted by the Jets, a gang of white boys who wage a territory war on a rival Puerto Rican gang. Anybody's was played by Susan Oakes in that film, and their gender identity was never really explored in any meaningful detail, which is exactly what you would expect from a film released in 1961. Now, West Side Story has been reinterpreted through the lens of Steven Spielberg, and this time around, it's made abundantly clear that Anybody's is trans. Throughout the film, Anybody's, played brilliantly by non-binary actor Iris Minas, fights tirelessly to be accepted into the Jets, and he pushes the all-male gang to see him as one of their own. There are a number of significant moments along the way for Anybody's in the 2021 version of West Side Story. The character lingers in the background for much of the film, but he comes to the fore in a scene in the police station where he is cruelly misgendered by members of the Jets, who speculate about his genitals and insist that he is a girl. But Anybody's isn't willing to sit back and have his gender determined by others. "I ain't no goddamn girl," he says angrily. Perhaps Anybody's most significant moment comes toward the end of West Side Story. He finally manages to ingratiate himself with the Jets through his efforts to protect Tony, which leads a member of the gang to tell him, "You've done good, buddy boy." The camera lingers on Anybody's for a moment as he smiles, realizing that he has been finally accepted and seen for who he really is by the gang he so badly wants to be a part of. It's a remarkable and timely revision to a character who came to represent gender diversity for queer viewers who have fallen in love with West Side Story over the years. Notably, West Side Story doesn't give audiences any concrete ideas about how Anybody's identifies. In a promotional video, Minas refers to the character using both he and him and they and them pronouns and provides some crucial context on Anybody's backstory. You can look that up on the Movie Times. Iris Minas is talking about West Side Story, so here is the YouTube video. Quote, "We meet Anybody's when he's kind of been disowned from his family and is looking for a home, essentially," Minas explained. "He's sleeping on the streets and he's been following the Jets closely, so we see this lost soul hoping to join this gang of brothers, not only to be accepted into a family and seen as a unit, but be accepted for who they are as a person and ultimately accepted in their own skin." Minas hopes the film will show audiences that love can flourish when people make an effort to learn about the experiences of others. All we need to be is a little bit more open and a little bit more compassionate toward one another, which I think we've all been in the cast, which is more than anyone could ask for, Z said. West Side Story was released on Friday, December 10th to critical acclaim, with a number of stars, including Ariana DeBose, garnering Oscar buzz for their powerful... Is it Bose? I think it's DeBose. Garnering Oscar buzz for their powerful performances. Sadly, the film will not be seen all across the world. It has been banned in Saudi Arabia, and other Gulf nations over the decision to make anybody's explicitly rather than implicitly trans. Sources told The Hollywood Reporter that censors in some countries asked Disney and 20th Century Fox to cut scenes which made the character's identity clear. When the studio refused, the countries opted to pull the film from cinemas altogether. The decision is a tragic indictment of where we are today with LGBT representation on screen. There are more queer characters in film and television now than ever before, but whether you get to enjoy those depictions depends entirely on where you live and whether the culture deems it permissible. Still, it feels significant that Anybody's has been written as canonically trans in 2021, leaving the tiresome practice of queer coding right where it belongs, in the past. Now, I really enjoyed the depiction of Anybody's in this film. I thought the way Iris played it, Nina's played it, it's hard now. Anybody's is a he, but it's being portrayed by a trans actor who goes by Z and her pronouns. So Z was great, and Iris, I thought, knocked it out of the park. Was easily a highlight of the film for me, and has some great moments. So kudos to that casting. Great for that character. As a matter of fact, I have to say that the casting in this West Side Story was fantastic. Now, one of the things that I personally, like, I'm always banging around about verisimilitude, the appearance of reality. One of the things that I've always loved about West Side Story, the film, is in a way it's almost like it's magically real, because the whole opening, and another thing that my friend Dave was saying last night, he said, you know, when you first watch West Side Story and you hear there's this great overture, and it opens on this graphic of New York, and then there are these beautiful widescreen compositions where the camera is panning over all of New York City. And in my mind, West Side Story, I know it's supposed to be on the West Side Story of New York, but it always seemed to me that it was a story about all of New York. And it has a different opening shot, but the opening shot of Spielberg's West Side Story is pretty spectacular. And it's a long panning shot across the slums that are being torn down to make way for Lincoln Center. I loved it. I mean, I thought it was great, but it definitely shrunk my perception of what was happening down into very much the neighborhoods that it was taking place in. It felt smaller in a way. And I thought that there was much less. Spielberg goes a lot more for realism. There's not a lot of magical realism. And I thought that West Side Story, first of all, you're skirting an issue. I always talk about verisimilitude, but it's, you know, to me, musicals have an inherent surreal quality to them. And I have to say, like, the opening of La La Land is a perfect example. You've got all these people stuck in traffic, and then you break into this great musical number on this freeway on-ramp. And then after the musical number's over, you're brought back into reality where you're stuck back in your car in traffic. And in West Side Story, in the original, there's this big gang fight, you know, that's spilled out onto the streets. It's happening down alleyways, all through neighborhoods. This big battle between these two gangs. But in the original, it's very much a dance battle, if that makes any sense. And immediately it gives you a sort of a magically real, surreal quality to the whole thing. And in Spielberg's movie, there's a huge sense of grounded realism. That even though they sing all the songs, all of the musical numbers, they're offset by moments of reality. The fighting is very real, and it tonally, I felt that it almost was too grounded in a way. And there are moments in the film, like when Maria and Tony meet for the first time, that the heightened reality of the way Robert Wise did it, I thought worked better for their meeting. It seemed a little kind of, when they meet and have their moment behind the bleachers, I mean, I get why he did it, but it seemed less spectacular. But that doesn't mean that it's not good. It just meant that for me, I felt that the entertainment level of what I was watching, the dance numbers and the way it's all staged is beautiful, but there's something about the heightened theatrical nature, because you're watching a play, a version of a stage play. So it was a mixed bag for me. The technique, impeccable. The movie's beautiful. And there were certain changes that I don't understand, like the I Feel Pretty number, which comes before the big rumble where tragedy has struck, happens afterwards. And I know that there's been, over the years, the I Feel Pretty number has always been a bone of contention. There was a great article in the LA Times about this recently, about the whole number. But there were just choices in there that I didn't think helped the movie. And I thought those choices were, I don't know, kind of strange. But nonetheless, it's still good. But the people that were saying, "Oh, this movie is somehow woke trash," that is not at all. And I thought the reason I wanted to read that article about Anybody's is because I thought this did specifically trans representation. It did it correctly. It was natural. It was intrinsic to the story, and it didn't feel forced at all, because it felt like the proper representation of the character carried forward. What we're looking at, 60 years. I thought it worked really, really well. Now, to me, that's important, having that kind of representation done correctly. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe someone we know will have to weigh in and tell me if I'm wrong on this one, off base, but I thought that's the way to do it. Now, one of our own Post-Geek Singularity members, Mikey Lito, who's off social media, so I don't know if he's going to see me read this, he wrote a review that I tend to agree with. Now, he's a big musical fan. We both love Tick, Tick, Boom. He really liked In the Heights a lot. Now, he only gave West Side Story a 7 out of 10. And I want to read his December 10th blog. Now, I didn't ask him if I could read this on the show. I would just assume I can, because he sent it to me. So Mikey Lito, our own Mikey Lito, Post-Geek Singularity member and imagination connoisseur par excellence, says, "I have a running joke about Steven Spielberg's West Side Story with a cyber friend of mine. It seems he, my friend, was looking forward to it. I wasn't necessarily. I kept reminding my friend that Steven Spielberg produced Cats. That musical, released around the same time of year, was awful. Just awful. Fortunately, Mr. Spielberg didn't just produce this modern West Side Story, he also directed it. I can give you my overall opinion before you read any further. It's better than Cats." It has always been thought that Mr. Spielberg had a knack for directing musicals. Our first inkling was the ballroom dance sequence in 1979's 1941. The director staged a kinetic dance number and a fictional recreation of the Zoot Suit riots. The second clue was the opening sequence of 1984's Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, a scene setter for that movie. However, for his first full-fledged musical, Spielberg decided to mount a brand new production of Jerome Robbins' original Broadway play dealing with a modern version of the Romeo and Juliet story. And unlike the 1961 version directed by Robbins and Robert Wise, Spielberg gives his story some context, providing this writer, Mikey Lito, with the grounding the story needed. Spielberg and screenwriter Tony Kushner, who previously collaborated with the director on Munich and Lincoln, set the film in the mid to late 1950s. The area where the future Lincoln Center would be built was being razed, and the inhabitants were being moved out. The neighborhood was once heavily Irish and Polish. Still, as the film opens, the area has become primarily Hispanic and specifically Puerto Rican. We come to learn that there's a battle for turf between the Jets, who are white, and the Sharks, who are Puerto Rican. Using the music of Leonard Bernstein, the lyrics of Stephen Sondheim, and the choreography of Justin Peck, Spielberg introduces the Jets and the Sharks to his audience in a much more believable fashion than did Wise and Robbins. You understand right away why these two gangs are fighting in a futile battle both are destined to lose. Ansel Elgort plays Tony, a former co-founder of the Jets, who now works in a drugstore after a year in prison for a previous gang fight. Tony professes that he wants no more of the gang life and is content with working for Valentina, his Hispanic owner of the drugstore. The other founder of the Jets is Riff, Mike Feist, who is great, by the way, the current leader. The Jets are feuding with the Sharks, whose leader is boxer Bernardo Vasquez, played by David Alvarez, who's also fantastic. Unlike the 1961 film, the Sharks don't appear to be outnumbered by the Jets, and when the Jets violate the Sharks' turf, a rumble ensues, only to be broken up by Lieutenant Schrank, played by Corey Stoll, who is always great, and he's so good in this movie, and Officer Krupke, Brian Darcy James. Later that night, there's a community dance. Bernardo warns his sister Maria, Rachel Zegler, who was also great, that he'll be vigilant about any gringos who want to dance with her. So I guess you can't have everything. The musical and dance set pieces all work for me. However, the characterization of the dance organizer in this film doesn't stand up to the characterization of John Astin. Sean Astin's dad, that's right, John Astin, in the 1961 film. Maria's date for the dance, Chino, Josh Andres Rivera, is played a little differently in this film. It was better, but still left something to be desired. I thought so too. I get it. These stories, both in 1961 and 1961 and 2021 are dance musicals, so there's a suspension of disbelief necessary to follow the story. I followed the 1961 film before viewing the Spielberg film. I found it anachronistic and, frankly, a little bit silly. In this respect, Spielberg's film is much, much better. Spielberg's film makes the love affair of Tony and Maria a tad more believable than the 61 film, yet I still find the romance taking place over 2 days somewhat far-fetched, although admittedly possible. Bottom line, Spielberg brings dramatic tension to a story that is not wholly reliant on music and dance, and I found the story much more believable than the 1961 film. Rated PG-13 for some strong violence, strong language, thematic content, suggestive material, and brief smoking. You should enjoy Mr. Spielberg's official entry into the genre if you like dance musicals. I tend to agree with that review, but here's the thing. I felt that a lot of the musical numbers, like some of them, like the reimagining of America, I want to live in America, was spectacular. Loved it. But Tonight, the song Tonight, I felt was strangely muddled. Whereas I felt in the original West Side Story, the secondary characters, I knew those characters more. I felt all the secondary characters in this film they all kind of blended together because the theatricality allowed all of the secondary characters, secondary gang members, to be a little bit more indelible for the audience. I felt a lot of people were lost, even though I loved the staging of G. Officer Krupke was great in this version. It's worth seeing. The musical numbers alone make Spielberg's West Side Story worth watching because it's spectacular. Other than Tonight. Tonight was the only it was the only number I felt that I don't know why. And it was only because I thought that the lines were not... The theatricality of the original, I thought, really worked for the material. And I really do feel that while this West Side Story was far more realistic, I did feel that the realism it was bringing to the story was fighting against a lot of the musical numbers, if that makes any sense. And again, it's a tonal issue. It's a really difficult thing to take. The musical inherently is an unreal genre, and to impose more realism on it is a tough thing to do. Although Spielberg did do a great job of it, I felt it needed more unreality, that it had too much grounding. And maybe that's just me, I don't know. But it's certainly it's worth your time. I really did love the movie, but I didn't love it as much as I wanted to. Whatever that means. I don't quite know exactly what that means. But it's unfortunate. I honestly think the question is, why did people not show up? Well, people don't show up because they don't know West Side Story. Modern audiences have no awareness of it at all. And when I think about when did my awareness of it really kicked in when I was a young budding film student starting at 13, 14, 15, reading up about Robert Wise editing Citizen Kane after Star Trek The Motion Picture. I was like, ooh, what more did Robert Wise do? I actually got to meet the man at Stanley Kramer's film class. He came up and taught a film class in Bellevue, Washington. So I got to meet Robert Wise and listen to him lecture for 3 hours, and I was lucky that I lived in a city that was playing 70 millimeter prints of West Side Story. So, and Robert Wise made Curse of the Cat People. He obviously made a lot of other great Day the Earth Stood Still. He has made so many different kinds of movies. And I was lucky. But nowadays, like I said, we live in that post-Hamilton, post-Moulin Rouge, post-In the Heights, post-La La Land. How do you get audiences really interested in even a story that is rather archaic? I mean, ultimately, when you're watching, you're looking at Ansel Elgort, who's a really handsome kid who plays Tony, and when you're looking at Tony and Maria together, you're like, what's the problem? Like, who would look at them? I mean, I understand a brother doesn't want his sister. It just seems like it is sort of anachronistic, and when you watch it, sometimes stories just... I mean, the Romeo and Juliet story works. Baz Luhrmann updated it in his Romeo and Juliet, which I've called the Blade Runner of Shakespeare movies. And some people say that maybe Titus was the Blade Runner of Shakespeare movies, or maybe Richard III was it Richard III? It was Richard III with Ian McKellen, was also like the Blade Runner of Shakespeare movies. But I think Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet is that. I could be wrong. But I really do think that even though with all of the beautiful production design and all of the beautiful, beautiful staging and cinematography and the way Spielberg masterfully shoots these dance sequences, everything I ever wanted from a Spielberg musical I got. I just think that it might have been interesting to see him tackle an original musical. Tick, Tick, Boom was a very interesting, I thought, again, I keep going back to that as, to me, Tick, Tick, Boom is a great, great modern musical. And I feel that watching this, that West Side Story was certainly a product of its time, and I just don't know, even though it had the best people that have ever worked in the business making this movie, including one of my idols, editor Michael Kahn, who co-edited the film. Sometimes stories just, they've seen their day and they belong to history. So I don't know. I just wonder, you've got to know, you've got to pick, sometimes you got to pick material with an understanding of who the marketplace is. And I don't think it's just COVID. I think that the world we live in, there's a lot of exciting stuff when you can watch a great filmed version of Hamilton on Disney Plus. I don't know. But I do think it's a beautiful movie, and you should all run out and see it if you have any interest at all. Speaking of that, our man Donnie Pearson, who is a longtime imagination connoisseur lurking around these parts, Donnie writes in a review, and he's a native Oklahoman residing in Western Washington, his home for 23 plus years now. He says he's been an imagination connoisseur since 2018, and he has enjoyed his favorite multimedia franchises, including Star Trek, Super Sentai, Star Wars, and all things DC and Marvel, the Ninja Turtles, Simpsons, and the Power Rangers, and the latter is based on Super Sentai. I've enjoyed my favorite game shows as well, including Jeopardy, The Price is Right, Wheel of Fortune, and Family Feud. That said, he wrote in to review West Side Story. So this from Donnie Pearson, our own imagination connoisseur. Last Friday, I saw the 20th Century Studios movie adaptation of the Leonard Bernstein and Stephen Sondheim musical, West Side Story, directed by the legendary Steven Spielberg in honor of the 60th anniversary of the original movie adaptation, co-directed by the late Robert Wise, that won 10 Academy Awards. I had fun seeing the recent movie adaptation, and I do love it the same way I love the one from 1961, especially the music. Kudos to David Newman, Gustavo Dudamel, and the New York and Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestras, and kudos to the cast and crew as well. The late Leonard Bernstein was displeased with the orchestration for the 1961 movie. The instrumentation that was originally created for a 30-piece orchestra for the musical got tripled for a 90-piece orchestra that has included 6 saxophones, 8 trumpets, 5 pianos, and 5 xylophones. Garth Edwin Sunderland of the Leonard Bernstein office redid the orchestration. that's close to that of the musical itself for the live screenings of the movie, with the score performed by a live orchestra. I don't blame those who were like, that 20th century studios movie adaptation drools, nor do I blame those who were like, Steven Spielberg is a complete butthead. I may recommend seeing the 1961 movie adaptation before seeing the recent one, just for kicks. I would give the 20th Century Studios movie adaptation 9 out of 10 finger snaps, which, by the way, is a big thing with West Side Story. In conclusion, I wish you and yours a cool holiday season and an even cooler year ahead. And this next one comes from our friend Enterprise H, the Ultimate Uniter. Greetings. First, have you watched the Let's Play of the game of Star Trek Generations? No. It's difficult for me to get any enthusiasm up for watching a playthrough of a video game, but I know you've been asking me about it for over a year, so I probably should. Secondly, a while back, I managed to get Star Trek: A Final Unity to run on this machine. I was pleasantly surprised to find that its fine wine quality still hadn't been exhausted yet. What is a fine wine quality? Basically, it means that something gets better the more one thinks about it. And this game, though I had knowledge of it, still managed to make me come to new realizations about its narrative. The game doesn't spell it out for you, but lets you come to these realizations by yourself. I also want to take the time to praise the terrific voice acting by Bill Krause in this game. I'm honestly shocked that he is not a bigger name in voice acting than he is. Now I have a question for you. As a lifelong Star Trek fan, according to Star Trek First Contact, the Federation has got over 150 members. While according to the computer entry in this game, the United Federation of Planets counts over 1,600 members. Which of those makes more sense to you personally? I would say 150 members does. I think 1,600 members is too much. But, I think 150 member worlds, if you think about, that's pretty good. But, maybe not. Maybe 1,600 members, it really depends. But it makes more sense to me personally that there's 150 members of the Federation because, there's a lot of people out there. But as we've talked about on the show before, there's a very small window of life and where they're at technologically and if they're the same. And there's a lot of people that aren't Federation members, probably more often than not, I would imagine. So, a good question. Omar, 94, says, another movie anniversary is upon us. December 13th, 2021 marks the 25th anniversary of the Cameron Crowe movie Jerry Maguire, which came out on December 13th, 1996. That's fucking crazy. Starring in the film were Tom Cruise, Cuba Gooding Jr., Renee Zellweger, Kelly Preston, Jay Moore, Bonnie Hunt, and Jonathan Lipnicki. Jay Moore's character, Bob Sugar, did say, it ain't show friends, it's show business. And one of my favorite quotes ever. The movie was a critical and commercial success, joining the top 10 highest-grossing films of 1996, alongside another Tom Cruise starring film, Mission Impossible. It was nominated for 4 Oscars, Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Film Editing, winning only one, Best Supporting Actor, for Cuba Gooding Jr. I would have given it Best Original Screenplay, probably. The movie has also left a mark on pop culture with memorable lines of dialogue like the one you use a lot, Rob, it's not show friends, it's show business, as well as others like the key to this business is personal relationships, help me, help you, show me the money, you complete me, and you had me at hello. That alone proves my point. It should have won the Academy Award for Best Screenplay. Original Screenplay, too. The film's success, along with others, solidifies the fact that Tom Cruise is a legit movie star. Well, you'll get no argument from me. I totally agree with you. Absolutely, 100%. So, yes, indeed. Let's see what you all are saying out there. Willow Yang's back. I was worried about Willow. I didn't know where Willow had been, but we'll find out in a minute. Writing in today is Stretchy Hulk. Stretchy Hulk says, West Side Story was upper echelon Spielberg. Musicals are a mixed bag commercially. Hopefully word of mouth will save this. It got an A Cinema Score rating. It's definitely a big screen experience. I completely agree. I mean, it's dazzling to watch. This movie is absolutely dazzling to watch. The music and the staging of everything, the masterful camera work. There's some astonishing camera moves and setups in this movie. It's beautiful to watch. Willow is back. Willow says, sorry that I haven't been able to watch your live shows these days. I've finally received a job offer after several months of searching. There's still paperwork to be signed before it's official, but hopefully it'll work out. Anyways, I haven't seen West Side Story yet, but in general, I find that I don't usually enjoy musicals. I appreciated Tick, Tick, Boom, but I didn't love it nearly as much as you did. Is there any movie genre that you generally dislike? Not anymore. You know, I used to be adverse to Westerns, but then it's because I hadn't seen any. I was just like, I was a sci-fi horror guy, and I didn't want to watch. Well, I was like, what do Westerns have to offer to me? And I think it was, I mean, I always like certain Westerns like High Noon, but I never thought of High Noon. I mean, yes, it's set in the West, the Old West, but I never saw it as a Western per se, because they told the same story in Outland, which is a science fiction film. But it was, I think I've told this story before. I saw The Searchers. One morning I woke up partying at my friend's house, and I slept on the couch, and I ended up waking up at like 5 a.m. and turned on the TV and was watching The Searchers and got completely obsessed by it. And Jeffrey Hunter, the original captain of the USS Enterprise as Captain Pike, was in it and loved it. I'm like, what have I been missing out on? That was stupid. So sends in a tip. Thank you, my dear. Can I say my dear without offending somebody? Probably not. But yeah, so I don't think there's any genres, by the way, Willow, that I don't dislike. I'll watch anything now. Pretty much. Sundrop Puddleton sends in a super chat. It says, you mentioned your girlfriend is playing Guardians of the Galaxy. Actually, my girlfriend's youngest daughter, Sophie, is. I gave her my game to play. I love the game and soundtrack. I like it so much, I bought the Guardians of the Galaxy game LP from Mondo. You should check it out. I didn't know they made that. I definitely will check it out, because even Sophie was like, oh my God, this soundtrack is incredible. So, Zod Ryder, hello, sir. Merry Christmas, my friend. I'm looking forward to comparing both versions of West Side Story. As a huge fan of the original, I want to give Steven the benefit of the doubt. Pa-pow! By the way, did you I think you did, because I think you might have tweeted out the picture. The Zack Snyder's Justice League Doomsday Reveler figure. Doomsday Reveler. Man, I can't wait to get that. It's coming out. I ordered that. Doesn't look great. And I also ordered the Martian Manhunter from Zack Snyder's Justice League to go with my Justice League action figure collection. So Merry Christmas to you. You've got to go see West Side Story. It's definitely worth seeing. 200 Watt Studio says, imagine if Spielberg remade Singing in the Rain. He'd have Lockwood getting arrested for singing and dancing on lampposts and disturbing the peace. Oh, I don't know if he would do that, but that's kind of funny. 200 Watt Studio. Ron C says, hi, Rob. Most egregious errors in movies. For me, 2-second computer hackers. Ooh, that's a good one. The most egregious errors in movies. 2-second computer hackers is really, really good. I wouldn't call that necessarily an error. I would call that unrealistic compression of someone's job. I mean, look, computer hacking is an inherently boring process, so I totally understand where you're coming from there. I think that, especially living in LA, when anybody can park right in front of whatever building they're going to in the middle of a city, especially like New York, that always irks me. But then again, what are you going to do? Show them going to a parking structure and walk to where they're going? I mean, I certainly get that. I'd have to think about it. Parking is one of them, but I can't think of anything right off the top of my head. But that's certainly one. How long it takes to get through airports? That's another one. 200 Watt Studio sends in a super chat and says, frankly, this was Spielberg's version of Gus Van Sant's remake of Psycho. Come on. I wouldn't go that far. Gus Van Sant was doing a shot-for-shot remake of Psycho, whereas the musical numbers in this were completely reimagined. For the most part. And that alone makes it not that. That's not fair. Film Noir 565 became a member of the channel. I like your title. I like your name, Film Noir. What is it? Christopher Gamer became a member of the channel. Jeffrey Reddick became, hey, thank you, Jeffrey, became a member of the channel. Carries became a member. Lynn Hobday, or Latino Slant, Mexican Iron Man, Blue Rock, Wakazashi's Tea House, Joe Hawkins, Patrick Malin, Cam, Quackley, Mr. Tickle Trunk, Dave Myers, Emilio Hansen, send in a super. By the way, thanks for coming, members. We're having a member chat this Saturday, the last one of the year, and it'll be fun for all of you members. Come join come all who walk or crawl. It's just two lids ahead. If you're a Shel Silverstein fan, how about that? Emilio Hansen says, "Did you see the Matrix Unreal demo?" I did. For those of you who don't know, there is what's it called? The Matrix something. There is is it Unreal 6? It's a Matrix game demo with the new Unreal Engine. It is truly unreal. I've never seen anything quite like it. It does look real. It's quite amazing. It's amazing what's happening. So, yeah. I really liked it. I thought it was great. Amazing. Matt Rissman sends in a tip and says, "I saw West Side Story over the weekend." By the way, Zod Ryder became a member of the channel. Why, thank you, Zod. Matt Rissman said, "Saw West Side Story over the weekend and enjoyed it tremendously. What did you think of Rita Moreno's performance?" I thought she was great. I admit I had a moment when she sang Somewhere. I love that. I had a moment too. No, I really thought that, I thought she was great. I thought that she was terrific in that. And I loved the fact they changed that and had her sing that song. Because in the context of what she was, I thought it worked really, really, really well. I highly recommend seeing this in the theater. Thanks for all you do. Well, Matt, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad you went and saw it. You know, it was really depressing because I went and saw it at one of my favorite theaters in LA, the giant, cavernous Chinese theater with its amazing laser projection and really, really loud, tight sound system. It was so great. And I really, really, really had a good time watching in that theater because it was great. Now, here's something. I was going to do this as a whole. Our old friend Throg sent me an article. It's an old article. It was on Polygon. And he sent it to me, and I read it, and I thought, this might be a really interesting article to address today, talking about West Side Story and things like that. So I think I'm gonna share it. I'm gonna share it because why not? Why not share it? Maybe it'll generate some more conversation. And I just want to share it because I think it's interesting. And sometimes when I read these articles that are older, I'm like, did I share this once before? But I'm gonna share it again. I'm gonna read this again because this kind of sort of it has something to do with the West Side Story and also Star Trek and everything. But this article actually was, Polygon is like reprinting this. It's part of their best stories from 2019. And again, Throg passed it along and said, this article is by Susanna Polo, and it was published on May 18th, 2019. You can't change your favorite pop culture, but you can change how you engage with it. And this, again, is by Susanna Polo. I used to read every Batman comic. The moment I stopped doing so was an important milestone in my love for the character. It was the moment I learned that you can't change your favorite story when it lets you down, but you can change how you engage with it. This is a message many fans don't want to hear, as they angle for nothing less than control of their favorite franchises. One group of Star Wars fans requested that Lucasfilm remake Star Wars The Last Jedi in order to save the series. And this week, a group of Game of Thrones fans released a Change.org petition asking HBO to remake the final season of Game of Thrones with competent writers. It currently has over 820,000 signatures. But a story is not a conversation. It's a statement. And there's a healthier way. healthier for our culture, and healthier for you to react when you feel betrayed by something you love. Why I stopped reading some Batman comics. There was a time, a bit after I got out of college, that the writer charting the direction of Batman, the Batman line, made a number of decisions I didn't like. I could feel the heat rising in my face every time I read a new issue. Beloved characters were killed off while others were abandoned by the narrative for the sake of his new favorites. How dare he ignore years of characterization in favor of a take on a character I knew to be wrong. Looking back now, with a decade more Batman under my utility belt, I recognize that the underlying conflict was really pretty simple. Grant Morrison and folks who liked his stories liked Batman for different reasons than I did. Not bad reasons, necessarily, just different ones. But at the time, phew, it made me livid. Reading comics became a chore, and eventually, slowly, even fearfully, I began to wonder if I should consider not reading some Batman comics. This felt like a betrayal of my own identity, at first. I was a person who read every Batman comic. I'd been that person throughout my formative teenage years into adulthood. Knowing that I knew what was going on in every single Batman storyline felt like a mental safety blanket. But it came with a hard truth I'd yet to internalize. I didn't own Batman. I'd always known this in the literal legal sense, but I'd also always somewhat believed that my dedication to his stories meant that I was owed something, at least in some metaphorical way. The character was mine, and my feelings about each arc mattered in a way that transcended those of most fans. I feel you. I totally relate. That's a toxic attitude, and it's one that seems incredibly common in our current media landscape. Loving something doesn't mean you own it. This simple fact is true for dating, children, media. Creators owe fans respect for the audience's emotional investment in the work. For example, it's gauche for an artist to disparage their fans for being emotionally invested in their fiction when the entire purpose of fiction is, and has always been, to create real emotions about a fake thing. By the way, I love this. Can I read this again? It is gauche for an artist to disparage their fans for being emotionally invested in their fiction when the entire purpose of fiction is, and has always been, to create real emotions about a fake thing. Bravo. Bravo. Something people should remember. Anything past that is icing. It might be financially advantageous for a creator to engage or respond to the audience. Doing so might be considered polite or good etiquette, but the interaction only has to flow one way. Expecting creators to revise work after it's released, or even to merely participate in the conversation around their work, is a breach of social contract. And expecting that the massive media corporations behind so many modern creations will do it the same way will leave you exhausted every time. It's okay to be disappointed by something without asking the creators to hand you control over that thing, especially if you control to you only means that they have to do it again in the way you'd prefer. That's not to say you shouldn't criticize it. A critic, no matter how many internet commentators pretend otherwise, is not the opposite of a fan. The critical voice has to exist for art to get better. People have to feel comfortable criticizing the things they love and holding them accountable for the impact they may have on the world, hence my hatred of modern Star Trek. But criticism isn't by itself a call for something to be destroyed, revised, or taken away from its creators. It's not asking for control. It's a necessary function of our interactions with pop culture that is, in many ways, cheapened by these calls to erase and recreate something to meet expectations of certain fans. Recognizing that you don't own a piece of media just because you love it, and that creators don't owe you anything but the work in front of you, has nothing to do with loving it less. It's about figuring out a healthy way to love it in the same way. It is a truth universally acknowledged that every Star Trek fan absolutely cannot stand at least one entire Star Trek series. But which one you despise is purely up to personal preference. Superhero comics are proof that you cannot keep an interconnected universe together for 50-plus years without alienating some of your audience at some point. We live in the age of the franchise, as fiction, as a brand. The most dominant stories in our cultural consciousness are designed to go on forever, And the law of averages states that at some point, those stories are going to be bad. But that also means that eventually the writer you don't like will rotate out. The characters you do like will be resurrected. Game of Thrones fans who don't care for the ending of the television show can still look forward to it in the books. Or not. If you're mad that the final season of Game of Thrones, criticize it. Engage with it however you need. For example, fan fiction isn't only an outlet for when one feels let down by canonical media, but it is one that is creative, social, and doesn't expect recognition from the creators. But you're headed to a dangerous, toxic place the moment that you cross the line from explaining what changes you would have made to arguing that you should be able to force HBO or the show's creators to make those changes. At that point, you're not upset about Game of Thrones. You're upset because you feel the thing that you feel makes up a part of who you are was treated poorly. Yes. It's not about a character being treated unfairly. It's about you being treated unfairly. But you weren't treated unfairly. You got exactly as much as the creator owed you, their work. And I'm telling you, as a person who is still deeply, deeply invested in Batman in all media forms, that the ability to recognize when you've invested too much of your identity into a piece of media and then recalibrate how you will engage with it will make you a happier person. What happened when I stopped reading every Batman comic, the locus of my identity for nearly a decade? I read other comics. I paid more attention to creator names. I started being excited every time I looked up my pull list. And I kept reading and enjoying quite a few Batman books because I found a way to do it without making myself miserable. The emotional tie to beloved fandom that disappointed never quite goes away. Just like an emotional tie to a beloved person who disappointed you. If you ask me what I think about the DC film slate, my fan voice will say that I felt sick to my stomach for most of my Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice screening. But my critic voice will tell you that what Zack Snyder loves about Batman are not the things that I love about Batman. And it will explain why I don't like those things about Batman and mention that I look forward to the next time a filmmaker gets to take a stab at my favorite character. It doesn't mean I think I should have script approval over the next Batman film. We have no control over how our favorite media engages with criticism, but we are in full control about how we engage with our favorite media, and that is not something to be ignored. We don't own our favorite stories, but they don't own us either. I thought that was worth sharing. Passing on, although I would add something to that. I don't dislike things like modern Star Trek because of necessarily my relationship to them personally. I realize you grow and change. But I think bad storytelling, even in corporately held franchise properties, is damaging to our culture as a whole. I really do. I don't think that if I read there are creators that work in things that I just don't particularly like. That doesn't mean the creator has a bad take on it. I think there are creators that have controversial takes on things. Zack Snyder's Justice League, for one. You know, Zodwriter will probably back me up on this. One, I really liked Man of Steel. And while I thought Batman v Superman was deeply flawed, the ultimate edition of that movie is really interesting. And the feel of it, there's something very operatic about it. I can appreciate the approach, even though I don't agree with everything in it. But there's things I can take away and enjoy. And I really like Zack Snyder's Justice League. I like that whole talk about operatic. I mean, for what it is, it does something new and unique that is unique to Zack Snyder as a creator. Now, a lot of people might not like the takes on the characters themselves, but you can't deny that at least what you're getting is a singular vision. But when I watch what I consider to be the dumpster fire that is Star Trek Discovery, and hearing that Heather Caden, the executive producer of the show, is unceremoniously leaving both CBS and Secret Hideout, and there's the meme running around going, you know, the Klingons were always bad guys, period. I'm like, great. Well, that's great. You know, you go in, you mess stuff up, and you just bail. Whatever. I mean, I do think that bad storytelling, there's a difference between truly bad storytelling and a creator's take on something that you might not agree with. Because there are times when I totally don't agree with somebody, how they approach a character, but that doesn't mean their take is necessarily bad. It just means I don't agree with it or I don't particularly enjoy it. And I should be able to tell the difference. If you're an astute viewer, you can. I think you can tell the difference between things that are bad and things that you just disagree with in terms of their take, but you can recognize it. Well, that's really well done. So, but I like that article. I want to thank Throg for sending it on my way. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, kind souls, gentle beings, I'm going over to Justin's channel to talk action figures 5. So join me and the fellas over on Justin's collection in 40 minutes. And I'm bringing an end to Robservations episode 771. I want to thank my moderating staff, Josh Levesque, Louise X Sparrow. I don't know who else is here. Justin Toner's here. Hey, Justin, how are you? And all of those people. And tomorrow I will be back with the Hollywood Half and Half. I believe we're doing a fully articulated on this show, this channel. And yeah, so should be a bang up time tomorrow. And we'll see. I did get my Night Vigilante, my Nightwing, my So-So Toys Nightwing. So that's exciting. I haven't got it yet, but it's been shipped. So that's great. And on that note, I want to thank everybody for supporting the channel via Super Chat and tips. Thank you so much, and thanks for being members of this channel. And thank you for writing in letters. If you choose to write to me, you can write at the Burnettwork.net website. Send me letters there. If not, you don't have to. But that's where you can send me letters. And we're going to have a membership call this weekend, as I said. And what else? I think this will be the last week you're going to have to watch the Tango Shalom promo. And we're coming up onto the fourth anniversary. You start season 4. So it's crazy. It'd be the third anniversary of the channel beginning season 4, something like that. I don't remember when the first broadcast of Robservations was. In December, the first regular broadcast. I guess it would be episode 2. But anyway, we'll figure that out. On that note, I want to thank all of you for participating. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, how excited are we all to see Spider-Man No Way Home? I mean, the reviews have been smashing across the board. Can't wait to see it. And that's all I have to say about that. Have a better day. Oh, wait. I got to figure out a way so you can't just hear every time I play with my I need a